I'm Gwen Wright. I'm the planning director here with the Montgomery County Planning Department, and I'm really thrilled to see such a great turnout for our conversation this evening. This is the first in a series of three presentations that are part of our Winter Speakers Series. We're calling this year's speaker series the Big Ideas Series, and the reason for that is that we are in the midst of updating our general plan. Montgomery County's general plan has not been fully updated since the 1960s. There was some work in 1993 to work on the goals and objectives, but it hasn't been fully updated for over 50 years. It was a really important general plan. It created the whole concept of the wedges and corridors in Montgomery County, and it has really served us well over those many years. But now we are looking to the future, and we're really thinking about the different kinds of challenges and issues that we need to address in the next 30, 40, 50 years. So we're calling our plan Thrive Montgomery 2050, and that topic, thrive, is actually a very important and meaningful part of the plan, because what we want to acknowledge is Montgomery County is a great place right now. It has many, many strong attributes. But in order to stay a great place, we have to deal with and address changes in technology, changes in ways that people shop, changes in ways that people work. Very few people have traditional 9-to-5 jobs anymore. Changes in ways that we travel, changes in ways that we like to recreate. If we want to stay at the top of our game, to not only just sort of coast on our successes, but to actually thrive in the next 30, 40, 50 years, we need to think about some big ideas. We need to not just focus on our day-to-day concerns and issues and problems, and we know there are a lot of those, but we need to step back and take this opportunity of the update of the general plan to really, look at the county in a visionary way, just as they did in the 1960s, and to say this county is not going to just, again, coast on its past successes. It's going to thrive. It's going to be even better, and that we're going to explore with this panel tonight and with 2 additional sessions some of the big ideas that are going to help Montgomery County be that kind of thriving place. So this is our first session, and it's focused on food and the future of food. And what do you need to thrive? Of course, but food. And you can't thrive without it. But it also is about how we use our land, how we look at more new and innovative ways to produce food, and I think you're going to be very, very intrigued with a lot of the ideas that our panelists are going to present. The next session will be on multimodal transportation and a healthy economy, and that's going to be February 11th. And then the third session is going to be on housing for all on March 3rd. And we have really amazing speakers lined up for each of those sessions as well. So I encourage you to not just spend your evening with us tonight, but to plan on coming for the next 2 sessions as well. I want to recognize, I think, I don't see any other board members except for Mr. Jerry Sishi, who is one of our great planning board members. And I also understood, although I don't know, Heather Bruskin. There you are. Hi, you're the executive director of the Montgomery County Food Council, and we're delighted to be able to work closely with the Food Council on important issues like the ones that will be discussed tonight. So I'm going to now introduce our moderator, Caroline Taylor. Caroline is the executive director of the Montgomery Countryside Alliance, and they are incredible advocates for for everything related to the agricultural reserve, which is one of our important areas of food production in the county. And I'm going to let her introduce you to our speakers. So take it from there, Caroline.
Okay. Yeah, they're ready. Okay. Also, do you want us to introduce everyone first and then do our conversation?
I think so.
After?
Yeah, just.
Hello. Thanks for that. Hi, and thanks to all of you for coming out on this sort of drizzly evening. I'm going to, starting here, introduce you first to our friend Ben Butler from Butler Orchard. Next, we've got Greg Glenn from Rockland's Farm and Winery. We've got Daryll Perkins, and he will tell you more about the urban farming initiatives that he's involved with. And here's Hannah Schulder, who is from Coiner Farm right in Silver Spring. So I think we're all very glad to be here to speak and have a conversation with you this evening. And now, what do we, pardon? Hannah's first? Okay.
Okay, I think I got this on. And then we have some slides coming up. Well, good evening, everyone. Again, I'm Hannah Schulder from Coiner Farm in downtown Silver Spring. It's great to see so many people out tonight who are passionate about food and food access. I myself got into this work not actually by the way of food, but by the way of land. My background is in land rights and land access. And so being a resident of Silver Spring and being, out and busy in the community, I one day came across this magical little place. Now you can see, yes, there we are. This little oasis in the middle of downtown Silver Spring. I don't know how many of you, by the raise of hand, have been to Coiner Farm? Oh, you know it, okay. But for those who haven't, it's like this total little gem hidden in the neighborhood right behind downtown Silver Spring, 1 block from the library. And the head farmer, Charlie Coiner, he lived into his mid 98 years old, and he farmed this parcel in downtown Silver Spring for decades. And so when I came across him, he was like 96 years old, still actively farming his plot of land, which is about 1 acre. It's actually 5 contiguous parcels. And I realized, wow, this is an amazing story, amazing person, but this thing is going to disappear if it's not protected. And that I realized I could help him with that. And Charlie also has a daughter. Her name is Lynn. You probably see her at the farmer's market. She's also in her mid-70s. And this is actually Lynn's vision. She said, I want my farm to be here 500 years from now when I return. She believes in reincarnation. And so, yes, okay, Lynn, I can help you with that. There's a thing called a land trust, and they're around in perpetuity. So I, along with Kate Medina, who's here in the audience, we started a land trust nonprofit, not only to preserve the farm, but to preserve Charlie's legacy. So I got the honor of working with Charlie during the last 3 years of his life to really absorb this incredible knowledge of a lifelong Montgomery County farmer and the techniques he used for decades. And we really wanted to pass that knowledge on to the next generation of young people thinking about sustainable food. What does that mean? Not only pass that on, but help them think for themselves about, what sustainability looks like. So our nonprofit, we can switch to the next slide, was named in honor of Charlie. And it was actually very interesting. We were with him the night before he passed, and that was the same timing as our first board meeting of the Charles Coiner Center. So he was very happy about that. So we are really here to inspire the next generation of sustainable food innovators. And we do that by hosting field trips for all of the local elementary schools. They actually get to walk over, which is kind of unusual these days. And they come multiple times a year. So they really get to experience like putting the compost on the field, seeing things grow out of it, harvesting. And then we partner with Manna, and they have this bus called Manny, where the kids come and cook the food that they grow on the farm with us. So it's a really hands-on experience, getting them to think very differently, connecting with the earth. We also have internships for college students, And again, we try not to be prescriptive about this is what a local food system is and this is what it looks like, but give them a space to experiment. And then we have a robust crew of neighborhood volunteers. A couple of them are also in the audience. And they really help us manage the farm. So if you guys are interested, we're always taking new volunteers and friends of the farm and new board members. But really, as it relates to this panel tonight, our perspective at CKC Farming is, of course, that fresh and quality food should be accessible to all county residents. And what better way to do that than by building neighborhood farms across our county, not just for the lucky folks living in East Silver Spring. And we also feel that our current food system, production system, this kind of global mass industry, it's really not working. And it doesn't work because it externalizes the real cost of food. As you know, again, it relies a lot on cheap labor and harmful environmental practices. And so at our farm in downtown Silver Spring, we're really trying to create a space where we can experiment and say there is an alternative. Let's find out together.
Yep, good evening. I think we got a video real quick.
It's dope to be here today at Kelly Miller Farms. For us to actually be out here cultivating the land, you know, in this food desert is powerful. So we are, you know, more than happy to have everybody here. We're gonna get our hands dirty, so everybody looks like they're ready to work.
Today we're at the farm at Kelly Miller in Northeast, and we are planting pollinator plants, laying down mulch and compost and irrigation, so basically getting the farm ready for springtime.
We're building not just an urban farm, which is cute and nice and attractive for most folks to volunteer at. We're building enterprises, ways for community members to build businesses, create jobs, and stay in this neighborhood when inevitably the value of this land will go up because of the activity that we're doing now.
I grew up on fried chicken and mambo sauce, so, you know, the idea of healthy food wasn't really, it was never an option. The next generation is going to be even more prepared than we are when it comes to, you know, growing our own food, not falling for people telling us what's right, but actually knowing from participating in your own neighborhood, you know, what's right, what's healthy, and what's sustainable.
While it's fun and great to have fun at the festival, I mean, this is more important at the end of the day, is to get people to do things. And so getting their hands dirty and doing projects that, you know, that really matter.
Well, personally, I'm not gonna lie, I came out here for a ticket for a Broccoli Fest. I wasn't aware that it was gonna be like a community thing, and I'm excited that it was. Like, I stepped into a whole different adventure.
Living in Foggy Bottom, it's so isolated from like the DC community, and it's just like a bunch of college students that are not from DC. I get to come here and volunteer and then also get free tickets to a music festival. It's pretty cool.
I feel like I'm actually doing something and giving back to my community in a way that's visible and tangible. So that's why I'm here. And everything else, the food, the ticket, the experience is a bonus. Like.
You know, I believe we were put on this earth to do more than just take care of ourselves. You know what I mean? Just do more than, you know, maintain.
I mean, you know, sounds cheesy, sounds corny, you know, change the world, but you know, it's literally making a change in the world.
It's crazy to see what we can do when we work together in the power of people. You know what I mean? It can be daunting to see a whole pile of wood chips or soil, but how much we can do when we work together. You know, it might take somebody a whole week. It takes all of us, you know, an hour or two. So this is incredible.
Man, we moved like 10 cubic yards of mulch, put down a whole bunch of compost, planted hundreds of native plants, and got this farm off to a great start. I appreciate y'all. Everybody give yourself a round of applause.
Cool. So, one, I want to thank, first off, just thank, you know, Montgomery County Planning for having us here today. I mean, I think it's really important that you guys are looking to the future in being proactive versus being reactionary about planning for the future, for a resilient city, for an inclusive city. And so I really appreciate that you guys are doing this and having us here today talking about food, which is really, obviously, a really important thing that builds us to be a thriving community. So Broccoli City came about in 2010. We were doing Earth Day events, and we didn't see people that looked like us talking about the Earth Day, talking about the environment, talking about community health, and it was just really important to me. I thought that, when we all live in this world, we all live in our communities, how are we making sure that we're taking care of it, and as well as building thriving urban communities. And for me, food was always such an important thing because it can do so many things at once. We talk about the environment, and when we get our hands dirty in the soil, it brings us close to the environment. We're thinking about the rain. Do we need to water our plants? We're thinking about our soil quality. We're thinking about, the whole process that it takes to grow a plant. And so what we do is we work with a lot of youth and do programs throughout the city on urban farms and urban agriculture, work with nonprofit entities, the government, as well as businesses to help grow these thriving urban communities and support programs that really are working to do this work and that are connecting folks, particularly in often marginalized communities, low-income communities, making sure that they are a part of the conversation, that they have access to healthy foods, and that we are having programs that are accessible as well as food that's accessible for them. We just found that we become so disconnected from our food system, especially, our young folks, that we really need to reconnect them with the soil and with the process of what food really looks like. And we have farmers here, and I'm happy to be with farmers. I always feel comfortable with my farmer brothers and sisters because it's getting back to that, very early stage of growing the food and making the process of food not so fast, and everything is so quick these days that it forces people to slow down, and as well as they also get a product on the backside being food. And when we're getting young folks in particular to be working with the food, and if they grow the food, they're much more likely to eat the food. And so if we're getting habits on the early side, on the front side, they're going to eat those foods, and we're building healthy eating habits on the latter side of things. So it's just kind of, it all ends up coming full circle, and then we have, the good of food that we're able to eat, we're able to sell, we're able to trade, that we're able to do a lot with. And so we have these programs throughout the year, and then we also culminate things in Broccoli City Festival, which a lot of people know about. It's now the largest music festival in the city, and a lot of people know the festival and may not even necessarily be as familiar with the other work that we're doing year round. So it's great to be, sitting here talking about that versus the festival, which I talk about often. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, my name is Greg Glenn, and I run Rocklands Farm Winery out in Poolesville, Maryland. A little backstory on myself, I grew up in Montgomery County since I was a little kid, and like many down county residents, our family would try to go out into the countryside and enjoy just things that places like Butler have to offer. And in 2010, my friend and I started Rocklands Farm primarily just as a one-year trial at doing some garden for farmers market, CSA, roadside stand. We had a deep passion in knowing where our food came from, connecting people to that food source and celebrating that through kind of the culinary arts. And so just celebrating the meal, gathering around a table. And so at that point, after a few years of doing that, it really started to take off and resonate for people. Our property is a beautiful historic property. It's got beautiful buildings on it. And like many of the buildings up county, they're old, they're historic, they're beautiful, and they're hard to maintain. And so we found that through Rocklands Farm, we were able to create a vessel to preserve kind of that heritage and the history in the up county area. Our mission is to feed, nourish, and engage. And so we want to create a physical product that people can enjoy and consume. And for nourishment, we want that to be nutrient dense or nourishing to your body as you consume it, and as well as nourishing just to yourself and your soul and your community. So a lot of people that come out to Rocklands, it's a breath of fresh air. You can unwind and relax and just get connected to the land, get connected where food comes from. And ever since the beginning, that engaged portion of our mission is to get people out to see where food comes from, to shake the hand of the people that raise it, to ask really hard questions about food issues, and just walk away better understanding the process, both personally and kind of on a global scale. And so at Rocklands, currently we're primarily a winery, so we produce low intervention wines, which is essentially being true to the grape, true to the place. So minimal processing, just delicious, easy to enjoy wines. The backside of the farm, everything else that we do is my passion, is the land management and regenerative ranching. And so we are trying to restore and regenerate lands through the production of livestock, producing healthy proteins for families to enjoy. And so I think that's the unique perspective that we bring here, is land management policy, consumer advocacy, connecting people through the culinary arts to healthy meats, and eating your way towards a more sustainable future through that. And I'll get into some more details with that, but yeah, we're just happy to be here, happy to be a part of the narrative, and yeah, thank you.
That was well said. I've got a little slideshow here, and mine's a little bit more based from the Butler history. So I am Ben Butler. I'm the farm and finance manager for our family business, Butler's Orchard in Germantown, just south of Damascus. We own and operate about 300 acres. We really focus on small fruit, tree fruit, vegetables, cut flowers, and Christmas trees. And almost all of that leaves our farm in a pick-your-own fashion. We do have an on-farm market. We sell a lot of our own produce as well as other local food, wine, and some other things sometimes. And we also have an agritourism business. We have a fall festival, a spring festival. We do educational tours, corporate events, birthday parties, and the list goes on. So a little bit about me. I'm a third-generation Montgomery County resident. Graduated from Damascus High School, got a degree in horticulture and crop production at College Park, and I've been full-time on the family farm since 2011. 2017 was an important year for us. My Aunt Susan there in the blue shirt retired, which most farmers don't do. You may have heard of Doc Waters' Hard Cidery or Waters' Orchard. That was her retirement plan. So I don't know if it's more work or less work, but anyway, it was an amazing opportunity for my brother and sister and I to take a larger management and leadership role in our company. And for that, I'm very fortunate. A lot of farm families struggle to make that transition because, frankly, if your abilities and the skill sets aren't there, you're one of the 87% that doesn't make it as a third-generation business. So we were very aware of that fact. We had an outside consultant come in, and over 2 years, we had monthly meetings and to make sure we were prepared for that transition into business operations and the diversity and complexity of not only farming, but in Montgomery County and with the many fingers that Butler's Orchard has. So just like I said, as farm and finance manager, it's kind of an odd combination of roles. One day I'll be out in the field and walk in, muddy boots and all, and run payroll. But that's the glory of a small business, that you can feel and touch all different pieces of that business. But my brother there, just to kind of show you the diversity of our family, he's our general manager. The agritourism concept he's really into. Marketing, Farmer Tyler on Instagram. If you're not following us, go for it. As well as just being the glue for our company, because there's a lot of different pieces that are moving all at the same time. My sister is our purchasing and hiring manager, Hallie, on the right-hand side there. She really networks with a lot of local businesses to make sure that we're supporting other farmers and other local businesses within the community, county, state, to offer our customers a lot of those resources also. Not to mention, as our hiring manager also, she interviews and hires and processes dozens of high school students every year, which is a big job in itself. My father Wade's there, and he's the owner, kind of does what he likes to do, whether talking with customers or employees or on the farm side with me helping. He's a busy man, no doubt. My grandmother is the really important one in this picture, a co-founder with my grandfather, George, in 1950. And if you'd like to go to the next slide. They grew up in Silver Spring, funny enough, moved after graduating from Maryland and getting married to a 37-acre peach orchard in Germantown, which, as you would imagine, was in the middle of nowhere. We're very fortunate that they made that move back when they did, and who could have known it would be what it is today. So that was the first and second generation, and at the next slide, you can see, back in the late 50s, we were selling peaches wholesale to local grocery stores, and it was very much a community-based event. We needed the help of friends and family and neighbors to harvest peaches when in their peak, and those same neighbors and friends and family started to ask if they could bring some home. And so was born the Pick Your Own concept. We haven't slowed down ever since. So the next slide was our original farm market in '64, and that was to sell some of our produce. And really over the years, the next slide will show you we've diversified, and that's been the key to our success over this is our 70th year. We would lose peaches every third or fourth year due to a late frost, and we got sick of that, so we don't have peaches anymore, to say the least. But we did diversify, and now we're over 23 crops, and that really spreads out our risk and really offers our customers something throughout the season to come and do at our place. And as we've grown over the years, next slide, it's always been a family business. I'm there on the right with the Orioles hat, just ready to go to work. That was '93, though, and it was a big moment when we expanded our market, which it looks like today for the next slide. And that's what it looks like today. The next slide is an interesting aerial shot of our farm versus, this is probably at least 8 years old now, of Clarksburg across the street from us. That's just a section of Clarksburg, of course, but it's just a sign of the changing times, and that we've had to evolve our business to really grow with the community around us. And one of the biggest things I'd like to mention is just as farmers, we feel that fruit and the farm experience is often undervalued, and not just fruit, but all produce in general. We have one of the cheapest food systems in the world, and I think a lot of us take that for granted. So you can go to Starbucks and get a fancy coffee for a lot more than $3. A movie lasts about 2 hours, maybe $15 these days. I don't even know anymore. We think that for our visitors and our customers, a $3 fee to come in and spend the entire day with your family, make memories, and pick fruit is well worth it. And it was a tough transition. We had a decent amount of pushback, as you might imagine, but really we felt like we were worth it, and that was kind of the end of the story. And just another topic about how things have changed over the years. Social media is our biggest source of outreach and marketing. We have 4 or 5 succession plantings of sunflowers every year, and the amount of photos that get taken and shared, if we didn't have the $3 fee, we wouldn't be making any money, because people really only want the Instagram picture, which is it's a reality we live in. And the other kind of an odd number I like to share is we sell and make more money in donuts on an annual basis than we do on blackberries, black raspberries, and red raspberries combined. So, and we work pretty hard for those small fruit. But just understanding those numbers and understanding where some of the profit centers are is a reality in our world, and that you've got to be able to adjust and stay true to your heritage and your roots, but give the people what they want. And a fresh, warm donut is hard to beat. Just a couple things that I think are interesting to mention. This year we'll be writing over 300 W-2s, which is my grandmother. I'm afraid I'm going to give her a heart attack because it's just a shock of how fast we've grown. The 100,000 annual visitors is several years now we've been over that number, which is just shocking. And you really try to think about the impact you have on the school kids that we see, or the families that make memories, or the grandparents who bring their kids to our place, who say, never sell this place. We've been coming when I was a kid, and those are things that hit home to us, and while we're going to be around for a lot longer, hopefully. And the porta potty expense is a true reality. It's sad because $30,000 gets you people who are unhappy anyway. So that's just something that I don't think a lot of people think about when you come to the Ag Reserve. These are things that cost money, and that money has to come from somewhere. And I guess my last slide here, I have a 9-month-old little boy. And in 30 years, I hope he's up here in the next planning session, and I hope that we do a good job to create an environment for him to be successful also. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and as Gwen said, I'm Caroline Taylor. I'm working with a small nonprofit, Montgomery Countryside Alliance. We're going to show a little video here in a minute, but I want to prep it by saying that when I started in 2009 with Montgomery Countryside Alliance, I started with a goal in mind, and that is to figure out how we could keep farms farming, keep farmers profitable here in Montgomery County, which is not easy, as you will hear more from the producers here. Farming is hard, but one of the hardest things we identified was access to affordable acreage, especially for new and expanding farmers. So in 2011, we launched LandLink Montgomery. And several weeks ago, my coworker Christina Bostic and I were absolutely over the moon to receive the video you're about ready to watch from our friends at Dodo Farms in Brookville. Oligi and Tope have a story to tell, and we have a few minutes to hear it.
Dodo Farms is a small organic farm in Brookville, Maryland. Certified by the Montgomery County Green Business Program and registered with Certified Naturally Grown, the farm produces vegetables, herbs, fruit, poultry, and eggs, which are sold at local farmers markets and CSAs. And this farm has a direct link to West Africa.
I'm from Nigeria. My surname is Balogun. And in Nigeria, the Baloguns, Dodo Dawa, is like a nickname for the Baloguns. But because of the pronunciation, that's why I shortened it to Dodo.
Farmer Olaniyi Balogun and his wife Tope Fajanbasi have been farming the land and selling their products for the last 3 years. She has a head for numbers.
I'm an accountant, I'm a CPA, but I currently teach finance and business. I see farming as good business. Anything with food is good business.
And he has a head for, well, cabbage.
This is Savoy. And at the other hand, we have Blue Vantage cabbage. It's very good too. The farm, the size is a bit less than 1 acre. And I grow strictly vegetables like collard greens, kale, mustard greens, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, cabbage, broccoli, and so on.
Niyi and Tope met in Nigeria and have been married for 4 years. They decided to settle in the U.S.
I've been farming for more than 12 years in Nigeria before I moved down to the States.
Niyi moved to the U.S. about 3 years ago, and he was very clear. It was either I moved to Nigeria or he moved here, and he told me if I move to the U.S., there's only one thing I want to do, I want to farm. So I was like, of course we can do that, but in my head I'm thinking, I don't think it's possible in Maryland. Well, he came here and he was very determined, and we started looking for, farmland.
The Baloguns found their farmland through the Montgomery Countryside Alliance's LandLink program. They don't own the land on which they farm. The land is owned by another couple who offered it to them for free.
We went on the website, we saw that we could be matched with landowners, and we were matched with this amazing couple who own this acreage, about 23 acres. And we came here to meet with them. They said, of course you can do it. And they just gave us the most amazing space. As you've seen, we're not the only farmers here. There's a hay farmer here as well. There's also a beekeeper as well. And they do everything to make us comfortable. I never even thought that was possible, so.
Let me give you a little tour on the farm. This is strawberry. The reason why we put cover here is that strawberry, they don't really like weed, and they really do well when they are protected from weed.
Now that's a weed.
This is collard greens. They're protected with row cover because of the weather. In the summer, we use this too because of the bugs and insects. But when the cold weather comes in, we still use this to protect it from frost. This is carrots. This is the leaves. Everything here is very useful, very good for your health. The next few weeks now, if you come back here, all these plants you see will turn brown. They can't stand the cold weather. So what we do, we start new season, we start the preparation by February, but by March, we start planting. We get our seeds from Johnny Seeds. They are very good, they sell organic seeds. They are very good. And when your seed is good, your soil is good, your produce definitely will come out well, with the grace of God. Yes.
So, as you can imagine, we were over the moon with that connection. We've been able to connect almost 500 acres of land within the reserve with new and expanding farmers, and we hope to do more. I think there are other challenges that we're going to hear about tonight about farming in not only the reserve but in urban areas. But if I had, the question was asked to me earlier, if I had one takeaway that I wanted you all to have from this evening, and that is your part in the food system, what you do to make sure that we can continue to have thriving farms, both urban and rural here. And so those are the things I'd like you all to think about as we move forward with the questions this evening. Thank you. All right, ready for our first question, right? All right, so here's a big one. We've already been told that we are, as a county, undertaking our general plan effort. That's a 50-year plan. You folks, what one big idea or policy or a series of small ideas or policies do you think we must promote as it relates to the future of food in Montgomery County? Anybody want to start? I'm looking at
I'll go for it.
All right. Thank you, Ben.
I've got three small ideas, I would say. The first is, I think we're going to talk a lot about this tonight, is education, and not just talking about it in a one chapter of science class in elementary school. I think an agricultural-based either class or real focused curriculum is really important. And on a higher level, the FFA program in the county, I think there's one left out in Poolesville. And while you don't really need to be a future farmer to be in that program, there's a lot of great qualities that you can gain from joining that organization, and may connect you with other organizations that can turn you into a farmer. So the education is one piece. I think protecting our farm families now, and I'm not looking for any sympathy or anything like that, but understanding that there's a large difference between down here and up there. And the Ag Reserve, there's sometimes some unintended consequences for those of us in farming business that's maybe an oversight or just unaware as we move, to such a massive county with so many things happening. And that's our job as farmers, to make sure we're heard. And I think the third point I have really is to understand that in our wildest hopes and dreams, I don't think we'll ever grow enough food in this county to support our 1.1 million residents, but really to make sure that we connect our young people, on top of the education, connect them so they don't get lost and even further distant from agriculture and really where their food comes from, because it's a scary future, and part of our phone calls this month of the year are scary. Are strawberries ready to pick? And just the seasonality of local produce is, and that lack of knowledge is real. So those are my three takeaways.
Thanks. Daryll?
Sure, I'll hop on to the education component and kind of go from there. Definitely the education component is key. We run some curriculums, particularly in DC, some in Maryland as well, that use, hey, lights out, kicking us out. We'll keep talking. Use the curriculums that are centered around food. So imagine it can give a context for what you're learning, that you're able to learn your science through growing food. You're able to learn about money through selling and weighing food. You're able to learn your math skills. And so kind of giving it a context, and nutrition, obviously, you're eating the food as well, but basing some of our education systems around food, and that being a base for learning about the things that you're already learning about in class anyway. So that's one side. Another thing, there's some programs that are really interesting. Has anybody heard about Produce Plus in here? Okay. So in DC and some other cities, we worked with a number of organizations, including DC Greens, to pass Produce Plus, which is if folks are on WIC or SNAP or any government food programs, they're able to get $10 worth of groceries from each week from any farmer's market. And so what that does is, one, folks have access to food, to healthy foods, as well as that then helps farmers to know that they have a steady base of clientele that are coming to get their goods. So that's a policy through the DC Health Program that they help subsidize, as well as some foundations that's been working really well. And you'll go to farmers market and there'll be lines of folks getting fresh produce, and then we'll do programs about cooking the food. Another one is called Produce RX, which doctors actually prescribe food for diseases and illness. And so you go to the doctor and they'll prescribe foods that will help you with your sickness, whether it's diabetes or heart disease. And then there's whole programs that are built around that help people literally eat healthier and get these vitamins in ways they might not have otherwise. And then another one is we've worked with the DPR is in taking some underutilized space in some of the park systems and designate that as space to be doing urban agriculture and growing, so those spaces aren't pushed out as time goes past. And there's been some other policies that have been really cool, but so there's some here in Montgomery County as well as DC, whereas if there's underutilized space and say you're a developer, you're a landowner, that you'll get tax subsidies by growing food on your property. And so I think that's worked well in DC. It could be worked better. In Montgomery County, it's tough because you have to sell $5,000 worth of food for it to work, and that doesn't necessarily work with just somebody that wants to grow food or kind of a community that wants to grow food for themselves. So that could probably use a little bit of tweaking, but that does exist. So I mean, those are just some kind of things that I think are big picture that lead us to that 2050 goal, but that are very tangible now. And to help fund all of this, one thing that we've been fighting for in DC in particular is a soda tax. So to tax a soda is a cent or 2 cent sales tax to help fund some of these programs, to expand them. And as you can imagine, the beverage industry is a huge industry, so it's quite a fight. But when you get enough people or the city behind you and people see the vision, I think people do get behind that. So it's kind of a combination of those things help lead us into this, this thriving future.
Thanks, Daryll. Hannah, you may want to tag on to that. I saw your head bopping up and down.
Thank you. Having trouble with the mic. There we are. Yeah, so building off of what Daryll said, I think something we're really key on at CKC Farming is thinking about urban farming not just as an interim use, but as a permanent use. And the importance of that, as everyone just said, is that education piece. Getting farms into kids' neighborhoods so they really get to see from an early age what a carrot looks like coming out of the ground and, when strawberries are grown. So it's that accessibility issue. We're not, blind. We don't think that urban farms are going to provide all the produce we need, but it's the thing that reconnects us to the earth, to our neighbors, because we're really losing that too, and of course to food. Greg?
Yeah, I think just like a meta narrative I'd like to see in this Thrive plan is really a focus on supporting the role of families in this community. I'm just looking at that sheet over there. My eyes aren't that great, but I don't see a whole lot of pictures of families. I see a lot of great programming and a lot of great technology and resources, but I would love for Montgomery County to embrace and promote just the form and function of families within this community. And I think the reason that we're here to talk about food is that food is a central part to just to culture and to a strong, resilient community. And so I would just support, what we're talking about with, underutilized or unutilized open space, whether it's down county or up county, for the policies to be, pro-productivity or in favor of letting producers come in and utilize some of these land bases for food production or productive conservation practices, things like that. And again, just this idea of fostering the next generation, getting them engaged, equipping them with knowledge and skills, because the reality at 2050 will be sitting where many of you are, no offense, and the next generation will be up here. So this plan it should be inclusive of the next few generations and how they're going to take the reins of this idea of sustainability and thriving and a resilient community. So certainly a emphasis on engagement of the youth. And I think what was unique about, the Dodo experience is, Montgomery County is incredibly diverse, and there's so many people coming from other cultures. And what I'm most surprised with is with my engagements with some of our customers, just this shift from rural to urbanization, whether it's overseas or here, is within a generation, you erode this food cultural heritage. And so the reality of food is it comes from a grocery store, it comes from a plastic bag. And I'm always refreshed and renewed by especially people who have recently come from another country. They're just starving for that connection to the land, to that fresh food. That's the reality of their food culture. And we kind of become a little bit callous to that. And we have this incredible industrialized, globalized food network that functions how it does. But there's a lot of people who are much closer to their food source. And so I think being this, engaged, interconnected food culture as for Montgomery County is that reality. There's a lot of people here. It's not that unrealistic for them to be going to grocery stores or growing the backyard garden or the urban garden or coming up county, things like that. So there's a lot of people, whether it's the next generation or the transient generation, that this access to the food reality, I think is really important to keep in mind in these policies. So.
Thanks for that. So we're going to shift gears a little bit and go to the climate within which we farm and the changing climate conditions, the extreme weather conditions that we're all facing, and particularly falling on the shoulders of our producers. We've had an increased rate of crop failure, reduced livestock productivity, and certainly diseases in livestock and poultry, altered pressures from pests, invasives, weeds, and diseases. And how will our farmers adapt to these changing conditions? What changes can farmers and communities make to build a better resiliency over the next 30, 50, or more years? Big question. Anyone want to start?
Yeah, I'll start. I come from a perspective that's not readily upheld by the general consensus. Producing livestock to create proteins for people. From my perspective, I think there's some unique opportunities for us to participate in whether it's local or global land restoration and climate restoration through the productive means of well-managed livestock. And I think that coupled with kind of a macro trend around the globe of as affluence is increasing, people tend to shift their diet towards things like proteins. And so I would just say that there's a really unique opportunity for the leveraging of these livestock within the norms of a shift in food consumption towards essentially eating your convictions. So putting your convictions out there that I really want healthy soils, I really want high functioning ecosystems, I want clean water. In my daily 3 times a day, my meals, where am I putting these food dollars? And so I think our food choices are an opportunity for us to live out our convictions. And again, throughout the evening, I hope to share my perspective on how I think livestock can play a really important role to that when done properly. And then the second, just the premise of, agriculture and the climate, by nature, you're working outside, you're working with weather. I think for centuries, that's been the challenge of farmers is how do you deal with whatever the climatic changes might be. And so I think there's an inherent entrepreneurship within the farming community to find resiliency, to be adaptive, to be dynamic, and to achieve results or achieve production regardless of what the challenges that you face. And so if in this generation, climate is the focus of our efforts, I think there's a lot of really strong opportunities from a management perspective to what crops you plant, to what systems you engage with, where farmers can find that resilience. And I think, again, what's so unique about this opportunity is that for folks like yourselves, the consumers of the world, is you have a really unique opportunity to consciously participate in that. So again, using your food dollars to support the things that you would believe in. And so those would be just some of my basic.
Can you give us the statistic that you've given in the past with regard to the improvement of soil, organic matter, and the retention of water on an acre of ground? Do you have a good statistic there for folks to hear?
Yeah, sure. So just it's sheer physics, but an acre inch of rain. So if you guys don't know what an acre is 209 feet squared. So probably 6 times the size of this room, maybe 8. So if you think of a rainstorm, we might get an inch or 2 of precipitation in a rain event. And so if you were to gather all of that water across this singular acre, does anyone want to guess how many gallons of water that might be on that 1 acre inch of precipitation? 20,000. Any other guesses? Think of a 5-gallon bucket. 1 inch. If we filled this whole acre with an inch and then put it all in a vessel, to measure. So 20,000. Any other wild guesses? 4,000, 3,000. Okay. So this guy is well learned. So it's about 20,000 gallons of water. I tell the school groups that come out, that's essentially the volume of the school bus that you drove in, or maybe a backyard swimming pool. And so in this region of the Mid-Atlantic, we're getting around 43 inches of precipitation a year. And so you take a land base like they're managing, 300 acres, it's 300 times 20,000 times 43 is the amount of water that passes across their land management, right? And so there's a huge opportunity as us as farmers to be stewards of the water system, and that primarily has to do with the quality and the function of the soil that we manage. And I think just an incredible miracle of this is that essentially 1% organic matter in an acre of soil, in those top 6 inches, has the capacity to hold, like a sponge, about 20,000 gallons of water. So what you're seeing with some of this regenerative ranching is producers who are expediting their soil organic matter to such a degree that when you're getting these massive rain events, like a hurricane that sits over us for a few days, and you're getting 10, 12 inches of rain, you're having these land bases that can hold that before it washes away into the creeks, rivers, bay, or might percolate through down into the groundwater. And so again, the narrative for farmers pursuing these sustainable practices is essentially around building soil organic matter to hold that water system, and that becomes a buffer to temperature, to moisture extremes, nutrient capacity holding, things like that. So
Thank you for that. Hannah?
Yeah, that's a really great point, Greg. And just to build off it, I think, again, something we have to think about here in Montgomery County, and especially Down County, in our urban area, is ways that we adapt, just as you described, when we have these huge rain events. Our neighborhoods are covered in concrete. This doesn't help us. So again, introducing more green spaces into our urban areas and making that part of our future plan, I think, is so critical. But then again, like thinking in the bigger picture in terms of resilience, I think you all realize, you're all sitting in this room, you're all intelligent people, to realize that this global food industry is part of the problem. It's causing the climate conditions in many ways. Of course, the greenhouse gases from shipping great distances and the topsoil loss due to short-sighted practices. So, of course, we need to think about how this industry in itself has caused a lot of these problems, and then incentivize more sustainable practices, as we realize that.
Ben?
I just wanted to add on to that real quick. I think there's some really interesting movement within the global industrial food system, where you get places like Hardee's, for example, Hardee's hamburgers, who it starts to serve grass-fed beef, or you get Walmart carrying things like organic produce. And so we can get into the is that good enough organic produce or not? But I think there's also an interesting movement on the other side of the spectrum, the macro side of it, where again, it comes back to consumer demand. There's been enough noise that some place like Walmart has decided to really push organics. And so, again, I would just reiterate, I think there's a strong power in the consumer base to be informed and engaged enough to then be demanding those opportunities. And businesses, whether they're small like ours or large, are listening, and they respond to that. Whether they're chasing profits solely or not is another point. But I think when we talk about the macro food narrative in Montgomery County, I think there's others who should be at the table who represent kind of that global food chain, and I think there are wonderful opportunities for them to participate in kind of re-nourishing our food shed here. So.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, I think, very well said, Greg. The rain events and things that we have these days, it's not new anymore, but cover cropping and no-till farming are things that have changed since I've been back on the farm, over 10 years now, percentage points per acre of organic matter that is just doing so much to avoid having inputs that need to go in there. And that soil retention of water is such a huge factor for us as we deal with droughts and things like that. I will say, the global food system, while we demonize it and it has its issues, no doubt, we all enjoy cheap food. And it's a cost of, like we talked about on the backside of things, our health and things like that, we're going to pay later. But the fact is, people enjoy cheap food, and for a lot of us, exactly. We're fortunate to have a global food system that puts an avocado in your kitchen anytime you want. But absolutely, farmers respond to market forces. That's what we do best. And as consumers, making those choices, and every little bit counts, I think. And if the more people we can get to buy those, local strawberries when the season's right, and if you want to freeze some and jam some for the whole year, that's great too. But those are, it's a tough battle between economics and sustainability of our environment. And I think going forward, we're just doing the best we can to ride that line and, take care of our soil and what's nourished my family for almost 70 years now, but also making sure that there's a future and that our kids and our next generation can enjoy the luxuries that we have. So it's a fine balance, no doubt.
Thanks, Ben. Daryll?
Sure. I think that there's also, while I'm a proponent of sun-grown, soil-grown plants, you have to look at the technology that's coming about and how things are growing in terms of using aquaponics and hydroponics, shipping containers that take away some of the climate factors from the food system, where you're able to grow indoors as well as grow year-round. We're actually in the process now at some of our farms is installing some of these systems. So we're seeing different ways of growing. You're growing in the soil, but you're also growing in a shipping container, and we're growing microgreens and herbs, and then serving hyper-local is serving specific restaurants that are right there in the area with the herbs or the microgreens or the lettuce that they might be looking for, strawberries too, that they're looking for. Again, I'm a proponent of sun-grown stuff, but I think it's very important that we also are looking at the different ways of growing, and that we're all able to see that, and even that there's policy that's making sure that it's easy to do that. In 2015, we actually tried to do, it was called the Brock Box, like Broccoli City, the Brock Box, and we had it in the city, but the policy wasn't really up to us yet, and so we weren't able to get some of the permitting process to be able to do that. So I just think it's important that we're just looking at the different ways that are growing and looking kind of as the future of things are going, because we're also able to place these boxes in places that are, affected by climate change, by climate disasters, where there really might not be any space to grow for 2, 3, 4 seasons, but there's still accessibility to at least fresh grown foods in one way or another.
And I think others may want to weigh in on the technological advancements too. Ben, I see you looking like you'd like to mention.
I just didn't want to miss the base of the question. I just wanted to speak for, as I go to grower meetings and different educational farmer meetings, farmers have, like we talked about, been resilient and have survived for a long time. And, diversification is huge of what we do. In 2016, we lost 15 acres of cherries in one night. And that's a big number, and it's painful. But, the diversity of our operation, not just within crops, but within donuts and other things, those are important factors to keep farmers, especially in Montgomery County, successful in the long term.
So the planners that are in the room here and those that might watch this program are going to want to know a little bit more about how we plan for some of the technological changes that may be coming to farming, as Daryll has started to talk about. Has anyone else thought about greenhouse farming and those types of things too? Greg?
Yeah, one thing that really opened my eyes, and not to put shadow on you, but I went down to Mexico to visit my grandparents who've lived there for a long time, but we had the opportunity to visit one of their friends who is growing organic produce for Whole Foods up in the U.S. And so we thought, oh, great opportunity. And we get to this operation, and it's very impressive, very technologically advanced. We're talking about a couple dozen massive greenhouses. I mean, just the size of a Walmart, essentially. These huge greenhouses. And basically, moon dust was the soil. And they were growing hydroponically the peppers and cucumbers that we have up here at Whole Foods. And so, neat opportunity to see how they're going to do it. And I really walked away convinced about sun-grown, soil-grown food. And again, not to cast anything against hydroponics or aquaponics, which is the growing of food essentially in a water medium, because when we arrive there, there's a big pond and there's a big building that has a couple tanks of nutrients that pipe into the system. And so what you're getting is a cucumber or a pepper that's essentially made up of whatever photosynthesis took from the atmosphere and whatever was in those tanks. And so I just think of this mantra of you are what you eat should really be you are what you eat eats, because that's going to make up who you are, right? And so if we're getting this organic cucumbers that come from a system that is essentially two big jugs that mix together with some water, to me that was just a little bit heartbreaking in the reality of some of this global food. And so I think there's some really neat technological opportunities, especially doing vertical farming or reclaimed land farming. I just have walked away with a firm belief that the soil was created to create good, healthy food, and that the sun is a great medium to grow that. So from a livestock perspective, we're pretty well convinced that having livestock that are adapted to your microenvironment are the primary technology, if you will. It's a biologic technology, but if you've ever been sucked out with the undertow of the current in the ocean, you know, fighting against nature is a very tall task. But if you work with nature, things just happen for you, right? So from a livestock and an ecological perspective, how we're managing land and creating food is in working with nature. And we find that nature is a great lead for us in how we develop our systems and our technologies. So we're technologically less advanced than some things like hydroponics, but that's kind of my little 2 cents.
Thanks for that. Hannah, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, building off Greg again. Yeah, when you mentioned the piece about the soil, and it's something that really comes home for us at Coiner Farm. You know, learning from Charlie, again, he had different practices when he was an up-county farmer, but coming downtown and being in, you know, urban environment where trash gets collected and, you know, in the municipal system, you know, he would take his dead plants and then he would put them out and be collected. So essentially we would lose all of that great nutrients, and then we would import cow manure or other kind of topsoils to then be our healthy new soil. And something we've experimented with support from the county and the Food Council and Sierra Club has been to build a compost system on our farm. And that's, again, radically transformed the way that we produce food. And again, talking about what your, how did you say it, Craig? What you eat eats? Yeah, exactly. But I think in terms of thrive in the large plan, our county is really forward-thinking in terms of not just on farms, but as residents of this county, can we all be composting our food and not letting that go into landfills, but really the regenerative soil across the county, and that's amazing.
Thank you for that. I'm going to kind of jump around here a little bit because one of these questions has been somewhat answered, but what's the largest obstacle to providing access to healthy food for our county residents, for our regional residents?
I think that to the earlier point that, you know, we live in a globalized food system, and so as a small producer, folks can come out to our operations or they can come out to the farmer's market or things like that. I think the reality is the majority of our food flows through the county in these much higher systems, and so as a small producer, one of the bigger challenges is to be able to engage with that. So whether that's being certified that you're clean in your practices, or packaging, to just delivery logistics and things like that, I think the challenge for small farms to enter in that large global market is really challenging. But to the point of being resilient entrepreneurs, I think the opportunity is to find more of that hyper-local connections, whether it's the corner store down the street or the restaurant that wants to serve your goods, or maybe the local school that's willing to work with you. So I think from our perspective, from the smaller farm, some of the challenges are more just based on the system itself and how to connect with that, how to be a part of the food flow.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about how we might better our distribution system, for example. Any thoughts on how we improve the access to healthy food through better distribution? What role does the county have in that? What resources should be brought to bear for that? Hannah? Daryll?
Go ahead, Tara.
Well, I think one thing that we've done via the Produce Plus program in particular was we've worked with specific small farms, and so they've come. It's tough for a small farm, as you know, to take a day out off the field to go and sell. But it helped that they pretty much knew everything that they brought was gonna be sold. So that really helped them in making that connection. And again, if we could have better distribution networks, or we had programs that were maybe that helped take that, we did a training program with small farms to teach folks in the community how to grow. They actually would come and get it. So that was a program that actually worked well, that we want to expand further. Is somebody from the community would drive out. We had a van would drive out to a farm out in Maryland and bring the goods back into their community and then sell them as part of like a pop-up farmers market in their community. But I think we do have to figure out better ways of distribution methods. We have, a lot of, this is just a concept, but we have the Ubers of, they're taking people around, but maybe we have systems that are, that are folks picking up food and selling that the same way, so farmers can stay on their land and work rather than coming to sell, just because that's a very time-consuming piece. But I think there's a lot of ways. I think distribution, has been often can be a challenge and has been for a while. So I think we just kind of have to figure out those things. Food hubs, I think, can help if done correctly, where folks we're aggregating food, and then from the hub it's then sent to other locations. There's different ways around that too, but those are some just things on top.
Thanks, Daryll. Hannah, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think touching on both of the questions in terms of access and distribution, I want to take an even more macro perspective to say, I actually think the whole system is kind of broken in terms of, getting food to every single resident. Food is a human right, good quality food. It's our human right to have that access. We're never going to have that in our capitalist system, unfortunately. The incentives are disaligned. So I think, again, land speculation in terms of where we're able to grow food, it definitely impacts that development pressure and, whether stores even want to go into certain neighborhoods. I think, again, our incentives are not aligned. So as, again, we think to the future with our planning process, how can we change our policies in terms of how we value land and how we bring, food into every neighborhood?
Can I make one more point?
Sure, Daryll.
One thing that, and it's a little bit different, but it's the same, is that we also just waste a lot of food, and there's a lot of excess food that we end up throwing out that our grocery stores are ending up throwing out. And so doing better at utilizing that food and getting it to people that need it to eat. And so there are a few programs that are working on that. One is called Gooder, and they use blockchain to date the food as soon as they take it from a grocery store, which is often still good food and you can still eat it. It's not bad, and making sure that it gets to people in a time before it would expire and that it's still fresh. Airports throw out tons of food daily, and so taking those things and just getting them to people. While that's not necessarily the farm, it's still getting to the root of people needing to eat food and people not having nutrient-rich food that they're eating every day, and making it accessible for them every day.
Yeah, thank you. And just tag on to that, I will give a shout out to MANA's Community Food Rescue Program, if anyone knows about that. And they are looking for volunteers too, so keep that in mind.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, for the last 6 or 7 years, we've been on the other end of MANA Food, just a happy participant with them. and they deal with lots of food, and they feed lots of families. And there's some things that don't make it to a family's table into the thousands of pounds a week. And so when I just think of the mantra of reduce, reuse, recycle, we're so focused on recycling, but I think of the most important part of reducing, and I'm not saying we should consume less, but to your point of utilizing more, like again in the film with Dodo, it's just there's parts of a carrot that we just eat skinned and topped and all that, we just eat a part of it. So there's a lot of culinary uses to these other foods. And so I think as a food culture to be able to maximize the food that's flowing through the system, and I would just tell Amanda every time, like, look, we're not looking to get more and more of this compost for what we're doing at the farm. We want to make sure that families are fed. We're just trying to help close the waste loop, and instead of this stuff ending up in a dumpster, ending up back onto a farm and be utilized. So I think it's part of the food culture, utilizing culinarily all the food waste, getting that reintegrated into society is really important. So
Very important. In fact, Lauren Greenberger here from Sugarloaf Citizens would tell us, what is it, over 30% of our waste stream is food compost, is that right? 30 and 40%, yeah. Yeah, thanks for that. Ben?
Lots of things going up in here. I was just going to say that CFR Community Food Rescue, we work with on the front end, and we, as a pick-your-own operation, if we have a rainy weekend, strawberries are going to sit in the field and rot. So we're very fortunate to have partners like that we can call and say, hey, I have this beautiful crop that is going to go to waste unless someone comes and gets it and transports it and can get it to the people who need it. So we're really happy that that's a great program that we're involved with. On a specific issue, I think Delegate Charkoudian has a bill in the states. Is it either it's going to be introduced or it has been about local food in the school systems. And while I would be happy to have our students and local families be eating our produce and whatever we can produce at our scale. The taxpayers and the community is going to have to make a choice because we can't produce food at the levels and prices as that global system. So if I'm trying to compete with Mexico or with California even, or South America on blueberries, as a dollar and cents concept, there's no question. So that's a higher level than our discussion tonight, but that's some heavy thoughts.
Yeah, sure. So thinking again about as we plan for the next 50 years and realizing that development pressure is immense already and growing, fewer and few areas are left to develop. How do we best support, and this is for Ben and Greg, we'll start in the reserve, how do we best support an economically viable ag reserve, and what land programs do you find most helpful in sustaining your economically viable farms? Go ahead, Ben.
Something I think that's important for us as a family and as a farmer, the Office of Agriculture within the county. I really don't have time, and our family doesn't have time to be on top of all the different issues that are happening in the community. The Office of Ag is our eyes and ears for that kind of thing. So a fully funded and fully supported Office of Ag would be a big start.
Say that loud.
Yeah, exactly. As far as programs go, the Ag Land Preservation Program, I think, also needs to be funded consistently. And we talked about land values are just outrageous, and even in the ag zone. But really, that's the only room for expansion, or for if someone wants to start into the farming, the Ag Land Preservation makes that possible.
Right. So good, robust receiving areas for transfer development rights, for example.
I was going to say the TDR and the BLT programs, I'm not sure, I don't know the details, that's over my head, but there's not much of a market for them these days, and that would be a big help to some of the farmers in the Ag Reserve.
I see board member Jerry raising, yeah. Greg, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, he shared a lot of things I was thinking of. There are a number of federal, state, programs that help with infrastructure development, some of these kind of capital costs for starting farms. So I think that program world is there. I think that the sad reality is that there's just a lot of landowners and farm operators who, just by nature of farming, the narrative is, the farmer's average age is getting more and more. The spouse has to find off-farm income, and the next generation is seeking other forms of employment. And that's just the meta-narrative we have socially. And so for Montgomery County, what ends up happening is you get some of these older landowners who don't have someone to pass the land on to. They can't afford to sustain it. And so development sure, we would rather that stay in open space and farmland, but for them, they're economically connected to that land. And so you can't really blame them for developing that land. And so the Butler story, our story is, I think, somewhat unique, but we've been able to creatively approach the ag business world and create the vocational opportunities for, my mom has come into the farm business to create kind of our event enterprise. My wife is not having to work in town, but she's able to create a flower business within the farm. So I think with this new kind of generation of ag entrepreneurship in the county and supporting that, I think there's a lot of opportunity for innovation and for these intergenerational connections to value the land, to keep the land in a farming, practice and that thing. I think being just as a county, being supportive of these practices, lowering the bars, easing that sort of transfer of use and ownership, and keeping that perspective has been really helpful for us. And I've seen some other farm businesses to kind of stay in it in this round. So.
And I think Greg and I are great examples of farm operations that, if we were boxed into a production world, neither of us, I don't think, would be successful at this point. So part of the growth of the ag reserve and of these economically sustainable ag businesses needs to be flexibility to adjust and pivot within the changing trends and economy and culture of Montgomery County. So the flexibility that as farmers as business operators to do the things that we need to do is going to be more and more important as we move forward. And one last point, I think that from a direct standpoint, having lead people in some of the county organizations, whether it be DPS or here at Park and Planning, that farmers can really just say, hey, who do I talk to about this? Because as many of you know, it's a tough world sometimes when I step out of the farming, my farming shoes, and try to operate some different business things. It's confusing, it's time consuming, and having contacts at those organizations would be a big help.
Thanks.
And I'll just piggyback one more thing that we found in our pursuit at Rocklands is I don't think Montgomery County has to reinvent the wheel for these policies and things like that. I think there's a lot of precedent that's been set, regionally, nationally, even globally for ways to sustain our open space and productive land use, for the next, till 2050. So I don't think that we necessarily have to have these planning committees that create new ideas. I think there's a lot out there in the social ecology where we can draw these principles and practices and integrate them into our specific situation. So
You're going to share those with the folks that are doing the planning. Great. Hannah and Daryll, how do we best protect our open spaces, diminishing open spaces in our more urban and suburban areas? And are there land programs that you think the county should be exploring, or we together should be exploring and expanding? Daryll or Hannah?
Okay, thank you. So at CKC Farming, we have a couple different programs that we use, both to incentivize food production in urban areas and then to protect the land. So I think, Daryll, you mentioned it earlier, but we actually have a tax credit program here in the county. It was passed in 2018, that if you grow a certain amount of produce, I think it's $5,000 worth, you can have up to 80% of your taxes, property taxes, abated, or as a credit. So that's an amazing program that we have here, and we need probably to find ways so that more people can use that program. But for us, and what we realized at Quainer Farm is that is an amazing incentive, but it doesn't preserve the property. So something we've been experimenting with is putting conservation easements on land that we want to use in urban areas in perpetuity for agriculture. But conservation easements, again, it's like these kind of tiers of options. It's ownership can still change hands. So it's not, so the property is protected in perpetuity, but there's varying degrees of protection. And so the highest degree of protection that we're looking at is actually putting the full bundle of property rights in trust in perpetuity with nonprofits, partnering with state level agencies and our county government to ensure that this land is around forever.
No, I think she hit it on the head. And it's so important for Montgomery County and for our cities as we are truly building towards 2050 that we do have these spaces available in our urban areas. Otherwise, we have these concrete jungles that are just concrete, and it takes us away from kind of what we started talking about is actually closer to our food, getting our hands dirty, closer to our environment, and how that's key for a thriving community is to have these spaces. And if you don't, your community is lacking a major component.
And I'll just add one perspective is that I think there's a shift within our generation that is different than the generation before us there's just a lot, the rental market. So there's a lot of our generation who's not necessarily going out and buying farmland or buying a house or buying a car. And so I think that paradigm has shifted where when we talk about land use, land management, things like that, I think there's opportunities within the next 30 years for land ownership to be maintained with where it is and for operators to step into that in a partnership to utilize those land bases. And so when we talk about how unaffordable land is, that's a reality, but it's not necessarily the core problem because you can still have operators under certain kind of relationships to come in and make these lands productive. So from a policy standpoint, I think just kind of recognizing how this next generation is not necessarily looking to having to spend all this capital up front or to buy the land or things like that to enter the market. I think you can create these opportunities for kind of a more slow growth into full land ownership, things like that.
Great, thanks. Now, we want to have the audience join in to the conversation, and there may be some questions in the audience.
Thank you. Well, a couple of things really quickly. One is I want to give a shout out to Heather and the Food Council. If you don't know about the Food Council, you ought to go online and find out about it. Second thing is we need to grow as much food in the next 40 years as we have in the entire history of agriculture. We're not going to get there if we don't change some of the things we do. A third point is farmers markets. I manage the largest farmers market in the country, I think, with about 300 vendors. And we learned a lot about the farmers market in terms of community development and the way it supports the merchants in the community because of the crowds that we produce. We had 20 to 40,000 people every Saturday morning at the farmers market, and that kept a lot of the merchants alive. The last point to Daryll is urban gardening. To go full circle, you not only get the kids growing food and eating good food, but you get them learning to sell the food at the farmer's market. They develop business skills. And the last thing that happens is they get their hands in the dirt and they develop a sense of ownership in some of these blighted communities. And then the leadership tends to stay in those communities rather than going off and living in Bethesda or Gaithersburg or some other wealthier community, right?
So tell us about what's the name of your market, so you give yourself a shout out.
What's that?
Tell us what your markets are. What's the name of your market?
Oh, it's the Des Moines Downtown Farmers Market, Des Moines, Iowa.
Oh, all right.
And with 300 vendors every Saturday morning, it's the largest one in the country.
Are you here from Des Moines right now, or are you here and you?
I was the downtown director in Des Moines. I now live in Silver Spring.
Okay,
and I'm
great.
working with him.
Do it here, fantastic.
I'll just piggyback on what he's saying. We've all talked about youth engagement, and the reality is I get taken back, a bunch of 10-year-olds on a field trip, in 8 years, a lot of these kids are going to be out there shopping. So it's really not that far off to be thinking that kids in kindergarten are well within this time frame as the active participants in our community. And so I just have to reiterate that youth engagement, youth education is critical because these are our fellow neighbors within the decade. So.
I want to pick up on a couple of things. Hannah said we need to rethink the value of the land. What I'm hearing is we need to rethink the value of the food. The food is too cheap. And the farmers here have said they couldn't produce food and make a living. They've got to do other things. When you drive through the ag reserve, you see a lot of stables, you see a lot of horticultural. Just so you're aware, horticulture is not food, it's nurseries, the official designation in the county. And it's like a lot of horticulture, which is great, and I'm glad to see the open space, but I produce food, and I can't break even. And the land is free to me because I've been able to exercise some of these options. So I think we need to be challenging the county to think about some ways to deal with the problem that Hannah mentioned, which is the price of food has externalized the real cost, the cost of pollution to the bay. Here in Montgomery County, a small producer can't externalize all those costs. I've got the $15 minimum wage, I've got the nutrient management plan, and I agree with all of that, that's great. But the cost of producing this food is much more than what the food is being sold for at Walmart or even Wegmans or, Safeway or Giant. So our farmers market prices are actually severely depressed versus the cost of producing that food. And I think there are creative ways the county could be involved in respecting the facts that I've just recited and figure out a way to make it barely economically viable for a farmer who can access and manage free land that's available in the county. The ag reserve is wonderful, but I'm farming on people's 5-acre lots because 2 acres of a 5-acre lot is a pretty good little farm. And if you put 3 or 4 of them together in a neighborhood, you've got a big organic vegetable operation going. And that could happen all over the county, not even in the ag reserve, but it won't happen until the value of that food better reflects the cost of its production.
And I think the terminology should be the value of nutrient density, because you can talk about cheap food as empty food, a flash in the fire versus the Yule log through the night. So when you talk about nutrient density, just really sustaining deep nourishment, there's a lot of value that's lost in our global food system, which is primarily kind of this cheap food or fluff food. It's lacking some of that deep nutrition density, which is great for the, going down to your vitamin shop to get supplements to make up for the food that you lost. So,
a question here? Oh, there, I'm sorry.
First of all, thanks so much to all of you for the important work that you do, and to the many folks in the audience who contribute to our local food system in so many ways. My question is about the resilience of our local food system and recognizing that the environment in which we're growing and the climate is going to change over the next 50 years, and the places where a lot of our food is currently grown and brought here to Montgomery County won't be able to produce food in the volumes and in the ways because their climates are changing as well. So what are the resources that our local food producers will need looking towards the future, decades ahead, and what are the support that you'll need in order to be able to meet the growing demand for locally produced food for all of our county's residents?
Great, good question. I'm actually, if it's all right, going to partially answer that. And I think, again, for decision makers, the county's new farmer project initiative in terms of making sure we educate next generation farmers. I think Ben mentioned Future Farmers of America, which is only at Damascus now. In the schools, we need the tools for people to know how to grow and how to grow with resilience. And one thing that people should understand, and I know the gentleman here talked about horticultural enterprises, those are thriving now, but be aware that the ag reserve is going to need to grow more food because we are losing arable acreage, whether it's in the state due to water intrusion or nationally, in a way that the reserve will have a bit more capability to grow. We're not going to suffer the same extremes that other areas of the county are with drought and so forth. So be aware that the reserve will be stepping up and doing more in terms of food production. Others?
I think just, supply and demand. There's higher demand and higher prices for table fruit crops that are based within Montgomery County. The farmers will produce it. Linda Lewis is here, and she's a huge producer of table fruit crops. And I think, she's trying to compete on a regional scale with international competitors. And I think if the demand for those local dollars and local food, that demand goes up, people, the farmers we have and the farmers, that we can cultivate, I think are really good at growing food. It's just a matter of dollars and cents.
Daryl, did you have something? No?
I'll piggyback. I think when we think of resiliency, it's often framed around ecology or the environment. And I would say that I think that the social resiliency is probably our primary challenge. So getting food producers, land managers to want to be participating in this community in that way, I think is kind of a hidden challenge to that resiliency. Because if you don't have the next generation or the other person coming in, you don't, there's nowhere to start with who's going to make sure this environmental process gets sustained or nutrient-dense food, things like that. So I think that the social resiliency is one of the critical challenges to make sure that we don't lose the opportunity for people to continue to manage this land.
Thank you. I'm hearing sort of the education piece, really important, increasing demand, really important. I think those two they're linked because there is this sort of curtain that is hiding the true cost of food. And if we can pull back that curtain and expose those and really have people see and understand this full cost of food. And I don't think that education is just, in the classroom. Of course, that's a huge piece, but it's just in everyday life. I mean, Ben and Greg, you guys both grew up in the Ag Reserve, so this was inherent to you. I also grew up in the Ag Reserve, and I now work at Coiner Farm. And having a farm in your neighborhood, having a farm that you are connected to, having land that you are connected to, that's where we get these eventual, in 8 years, those are going to become the consumers. Who are, but not everyone is able to go to Mexico and to see the way that these, aquaponic productions are happening and what it necessarily is going, the nutrients that are going into their food so that they can make the educated consumer choices. So I can't agree with you guys more. I was just trying to draw a link between the education and increasing the demand.
Thanks, Kate. Got it. Oh, it's over here. Keep you exercised.
The Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments updated their report published in last January, what our region grows, and it's basically, Buoy de Largo, the western side of the bay, the greater Metro DC area. They had market baskets showing that at best we grow maybe 10% of certain commodities. I pushed Lindsay Smith, who was one of the people working on the report, to say what's the overall average. As he said, probably less than 1% of the food we eat on these table-produced things is grown in this region. Most of the Ag Reserve is commodity crops, hay, horses, similarly for a lot of the Eastern Shore and production. So a lot of the food is trucked in here. Diesel trucks move 90% of the freight in this country, including our food. The price of diesel is going to go up. Our resilience is really at risk if we can only feed 1%. So one of the things we need to look at is how do we strengthen and encourage those markets that support, how do we reduce the labor and the overhead for what it needs to be done to get your produce from the farm to the table. I mentioned to Dave, I met him just this evening, that Mark Elridge pitched forth the idea of creating regional, I don't know if you call them food hubs, but markets where the food could be aggregated. There would be somebody there 24/7 running it to take over the overhead of, your pop-up farmers markets, which are very labor intensive and risky because you don't know what's going to be able to be sold that day, what will spoil. I wish you would say more about this idea, because it seems to me it's a bridge point between the producers and the consumers. We really need to educate the consumers to buy local and support these guys, but we also need to have a steady source and know that we can get it, particularly restaurateurs that want to order things. So Dave, will you say some more?
What we're talking about is a possibility of an innovation district that would tie together all of these things, production, distribution, sales, and it's something that the county is looking into now. And as you were saying, it ties together all of these things. It's a way, I think, of really looking at the cost issue and looking at the production issue. And of course, vertical farming, we're looking at all of those kinds of things because they're less land intensive. And of course, one of the big costs in farming obviously is land, unless you have free land. So those are some of the things that in this proposal that the county is looking at. And anybody just stop, I'll give you a card and I'll send you a copy of the proposal.
Good.
And not to
put it on the
not to
website.
counter the idea of the food hub, which I think provides a number of solutions. I think just the ground floor opportunity is we already have operation. We have, Butler's Orchard, we have Homestead Farm, we have, there's already producers who are producing food at scale, where if you're looking for an already built system, and if there's means for the county to get people out into the agriculture to buy food more, you already have some of the food production, food distribution, food marketing systems. And so I'm sure 20 to 50% growth for you guys would mean a lot. I think the supply and demand can also offer that realization of the real value of food, not to mention opening the door for kind of new, farm operations to say, hey, look, we're slammed here. I have 20 acres. Can you come start growing something else that we can provide? So I don't think that we should overlook the existing infrastructure of the food, shed within the county already. I think you should maximize that at the very least if you're thinking of initiating kind of new systems, which I would imagine require a lot of resources to build out and to staff and things like that. So it already exists. Food's already being sold. It's already being grown locally. Buy local, eat local kind of movement. So I would push for the county to consider how can they connect with the existing food infrastructure and to build that.
Can I add, with regard to the innovation district, and I'm not sure of the details of that, there are other jurisdictions, Portland being one of them, that has figured out how to make their green spaces grow food, and grow food that's free. And so in terms of a big idea I have is for us to look at those models and to see how we might, in our more populous areas, provide for green space that gives back equitably that way, and use those models.
We can take one more question and then we'll.
I wanted to see if someone could speak to the issue of growing food hyper local, like your own front yard. And there are lots of lawns out there and lots of area that could be used. And I know the Montgomery County Master Gardeners have been great in being able to provide workshops on how to grow vegetables and fruits. And there are other opportunities of people to go out to your farms and learn about farming from you, like local woofing type of learning opportunities and using students. Can you all speak to that? Do you know of people who are doing that, and would you recommend that as part of the local solution?
I can start us off. Kate may be mad at me because I'm speaking off the cuff, but in our neighborhood, in the East Silver Spring neighborhood, we have neighbors who have the persimmon tree and the pawpaw, and I've really been thinking, it's almost like what you were saying about these regional hubs, but on the micro scale. How can we collect their produce and bring it to market? But also, again, it's not just for like making the money and selling the things, it's getting more people involved and really seeing themselves connected to those and the viability and the productivity of what's growing already in their own yards.
And I think that really reinforces the idea of resilient community. I think when you get individuals who are working the land, getting their hands dirty, participating in their culinary history, I think you're building a really strong fabric for them and just their general life. And so I think your quality of life could increase for those who are participating in that.
one of the programs that we do is we call it Block the Block. And so we'll take a block and we'll do work days on those blocks, and everybody will help do each other's yards and grow. We work with Casey Trees in the past, and they've helped, provide fruit trees and things like that. But I think, you're right on point. And even folks, we say if you have an apartment, you can still grow your herbs and still do stuff in your apartment or, on the balconies. There's still a lot of ways to grow. And so we always encourage people, to do that. And I'm sure folks know about Rooting DC. They always have great stuff, which is coming up. Rooting DC is incredible, and they have a lot of these resources too.
Thanks for that. I'm being told that we want to make sure we get people home and not too late, but I think we can see that this conversation is ongoing, and I want to thank each of our panelists. I also want to thank thank you. Yeah, thank you. And I want to thank Gwen and the Planning Commission and staff here for doing such a great job of pulling this all together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming. Just wanted to, Carrie Sanders with the Planning Department, remind everybody we have our next session on Tuesday, February 11th, multimodal transportation and a healthy economy. So please spread the word. This is a great turnout, and we'd love to see you on that evening. So thanks so much. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you for Caroline for your excellent moderation, and we look forward to seeing you again.
And as you're heading out the door on Saturday at Black Hills Regional Park, they're screening Biggest Little Farm. So for anyone who hasn't seen that great film, take a look online.